I'm going to do, I want to speak about the death of our inner wounds and trauma. And many people have come through trauma. I had myself 13 years of abuse as a child, and it's taken me a long time to heal, you know, the worst of that. But healing is an ongoing thing. It's not a one-hit wonder, because we have things called flashbacks, and we can be triggered by events in the world or on the news or families and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do, I haven't got any viewers right this second, but what I'm going to do is go for it, and I'm going to start reading something that I wrote yesterday, and in fact today. So basically, this is what I wrote today. It says, when we have had trauma, it is not a fault that it's not our fault that we cannot get over it. Others' expectations of us pushing a delete button to happiness or forgiveness are not only unrealistic. So when people basically, okay, let's start again. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm talking about childhood trauma. I've just got a new book as well that I'm reading. I study evolutionary astrology, and this book is called Understanding Karmic Complexes. So I do think with trauma, I don't know, not everybody, you know, may believe in past life stuff. I sort of do in a way, in the sense that, you know, in my dream state, I pick up on a lot of things. And also the other thing, when I'm actually asleep, you know, I get to see things that I don't see in this reality being awake. The other thing I find is that when we look into the eyes of a baby, for instance, we can see there is a knowingness. And whether, you know, we do, you know, bring in past traumas into this life, it's questionable. Some people will swear that we do. I don't know myself, I'm 50-50, but I can see that the more I delve into it, that I can see that my life is far bigger than I know, and there's so much unknown in the world that we just don't know what the reality is out there, and whether there are other realms. But basically, it's more to do, what I'm talking about is more to do with the imprints that we've been given in this lifetime. And for some of us, we may look back and think that it comes from past lives and it's our karma. But when we've been through very heinous trauma, you know, for years, like if people have been through sexual abuse and violence as children, it's very difficult for people to hear that possibly is their karma and it came from a past life. In fact, it's quite cruel for people to suggest such a thing, and that such, you know, cruelty is because of something that we've done, because it's very hard also to get over trauma in this life, let alone thinking about past lives. I'm going to read something I wrote earlier on Facebook, and it is going to apply to what I'm going to talk about tonight. And I hope whoever is watching, you can hear me. So what I've got is that when we have had trauma, it is not a fault that we cannot just get over it. Others' expectations of us just pushing a delete button to happiness or forgiveness is not only unrealistic, it is damaging and creates further triggers and flashbacks. So in our dealings with others, if we get triggered or we're being dismissed via words and behaviors of others, then we've got to look at who we're turning to for our healing. Healing is a gentle process, step by step, moment by moment. And I have found that some of the deepest wounds in the end made the biggest, where I've made the biggest leaps. So when I've really gone deep into my own grieving, and when I've really basically become aware consciously that I've, you know, had stuff to heal, that's where I've really began to heal. When we're just, you know, acting out and having flashbacks and we don't know what the hell is going on, it's very difficult for us to heal. I now know what a flashback is. For instance, I know that when I'm having, if I see something or I hear somebody's voice that maybe triggers me, I know what's going on. So there is a list from Pete Walker's book, and it's called, the book that I'm going to recommend to anybody that's healing from childhood trauma, whether it's verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or spiritual abuse, any abuse in childhood that's been long-term. This book is going to help. And what is long term? You know, it can be, for some people, it can be a few months of their lives that could be, you know, extremely traumatic, and others it's going to play out for years. So what we can do is that we can start looking at how we manage our flashbacks. And there are 13 steps for managing flashbacks from Pete Waters' book. And what I've done is shortened the list. The longer list is below, but I've shortened it slightly. So there are 13 steps for managing flashbacks. The first one is going to be is that, and you can get this list from me if you want it, you just come over to my Facebook page or email me. The first thing you say to yourself, I am having a flashback. So when you have that moment where you're freaking out and you think there's something wrong with you, the reality is you're probably having a flashback. Number 2 is remind yourself, I feel afraid, but I am no longer in danger. So we've got to get to the point where we realize that even though we may feel all of that fear and we feel like things are out of control, that generally when we're having a flashback, we are not in danger. And the problem with flashbacks, they can lead into panic attacks and deep anxiety and panic attacks. So with that inner voice, if we start re-educating ourselves and we remind ourselves, although I feel afraid, I am not in danger. Number 3 is own our right and need to have boundaries. A lot of people have been through abuse because of the way consensus reality works, and particularly if people have been abused by their parents. You're going to have friends maybe, or people in your life that have not been through abuse at the hands of their parents or sexually abused by a father and stuff like that. So a lot of people are just going to throw the forgive them, they're your parents at you. But this clearly does not work in reality for people that have gone into trauma, because what happens is in childhood, if you're severely beaten or you've had sexual abuse or emotional abuse, you go into freeze. I know that, you know, I saw a child being screamed at the other day by an adult, and I saw this little person just absolutely go into this freeze mode. And we can't just, you know, we've got to process the stuff that's happened to us. But when we go into this freeze mode as a child, what happens is we play that out all our lives in different situations and scenarios. So you might see that if somebody, you know, raises their voice to you and you experience that in childhood, although you're safe, you're still going to get that feeling. You know, you might have a funny feeling in your stomach. You might feel completely freaked out and you just go into freeze, or we just don't know how to communicate. You know, that's the other thing. It's tragic that so many adults are unable to access easy information to healing this stuff. So the Pete Walker book, which is below, you can also see that it's free on Audible USA, and it's also free on Kindle UK. So what I've got here is that the next list, for anybody joining, the list is going to be below. The number 4 is when we go into flashbacks, the way to manage them is to speak reassuringly to the inner child. I had a big problem, you know, accessing my own inner child for a long time, because as a child, I didn't bond with myself. You know, we do have a bonding with ourselves. And if we're basically mistreated, then we split off and we freeze, and we have this imprint then that keeps playing out as adults. So we have to speak reassuringly to our own inner child and tell that child that it's loved. We need to deconstruct, number 5, eternity thinking. Oh, I just see a message there from somebody. It's from Skip, who runs the Carl Jung Psychology Reading Group, a wonderful YouTube channel. And Skip is saying, thank you for doing these videos, Penelope. They are valuable to many. Thank you, Skip. And Skip says, I was watching a real-time documentary about 9/11 last night, and many, many people in that video were clearly in freeze mode. It's called 102 Minutes. Yes, I saw somebody, a friend of mine, Skip, posted on Facebook yesterday that she was in New York when that happened in Manhattan at eye level, having lunch somewhere. And it is terrifying. And, you know, people do go into freeze, and society's not set up to really put this information out there clearly and make it easy for people. So when we've been through trauma, and particularly in childhood, what we can then do is that we need to deconstruct eternity thinking. We need to start talking to ourselves in ways that's really going to help heal that part of ourselves that's wounded. So we need to, when we start freaking out about what may happen in the future, We can deconstruct eternity thinking. I can tell you myself that part of my healing was that I lost a business in 2017 that I'd had from the age of 21. So nearly 30 years I had a business, and I got so, had so many flashbacks and completely had a meltdown. And in that meltdown, there were a lot of losses for me. And I can tell you that I've survived it, and that we need not fear the future, that there are people out in this world who are going to help us, and that we just need to verbalize what we need help with. There are people that will understand. If you get people that are just, if you're talking to people about your trauma, and clearly you've got to be able to trust people. If you are talking to people about any abuse that you have received, and they tell you that you've just got to forgive, then it's not going to help you unless you're working along those lines and you think that you want to forgive. So going on up to number 6, Pete Walker says, remind yourself that you are in an adult body with allies and skills and resources to protect you that you never had as a child. Feeling small and little is a sure sign of having a flashback. So you might realize that when you go into flashback mode and you're completely freaking out, that basically you are having a flashback, and you will feel small and little. We've all got that child inside us, no matter how old we are. I still experience my inner child, and I know when she needs me, and I stand up for her now. I won't let anybody mess with her. Number 7 is that we need to understand that we need to ease ourselves back into our body, because fear launches us into heady worrying or numbing or spacing out. So when you see yourself worrying or looping or obsessing or numbing and spacing out, you know that you can just, sit down somewhere, put your hands on your knees and just, breathe. Just take a moment to yourself. And if somebody's with you, get somebody to hold your hand. If, even I found when I've had these in public, and I've said to a stranger, I'm having a flashback, I just need you to stand with me for a moment. There are people in this world that help. There are more good people in this world than there are bad people. And the problem is that if the abuse has been in childhood, then it's really difficult to trust that there are good people in this world. But I can absolutely tell you that there are more good people than not. And there are more safe people than not as well. The other thing we need to do is resist the inner critics drasticizing and catastrophizing. So for instance, I went through a stage where everything in my body, like any little thing, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. There's something wrong with me. And generally that's when we go into panic attack mode. We can think that, that we're going to drasticize and we're going to catastrophize. And we need to, if we're worried about our health, go and get, a checkup or something. Go and get a regular checkup. Don't be looping over, with these sort of thoughts of death. I mean, the thing is with death is that everybody's going to die. All of us, me included. The leaves fall off the trees, they die. Everything's dying all of the time. You buy a new computer that gets old. It's, information, it's everything's on a cycle. But, we need to keep ourselves healthy. And one way of doing that is, getting regular checkups and eating healthy as well, and getting rid of the things that cause us stress. There's so much we can do to help ourselves to heal childhood stuff. And the next thing is that number 9, which is a very important thing in healing childhood trauma, is and pulling ourselves out of flashbacks, is allowing ourselves to grieve. So flashbacks are opportunities to release old, unexpressed feelings of fear, hurt, and abandonment, and to validate and then soothe the child's past experience of helplessness and hopelessness. Healthy grieving can turn our tears into self-compassion and our anger into self-protection. So there are stages we go through. I'm going to add to the link below, and there are 5 stages to grieving, like the loss of a loved one. And the loss of our childhood is the same thing. If we've been completely treated so badly that it's playing out and we're stuck in a mode of freeze all the time. Number 10 of the 13 steps of managing flashbacks are cultivate safe relationships and seek support. So clearly, when we've got abandonment issues, it's going to be difficult to just, trust anybody. So we've got to build relationships slowly, and we've got to make sure. I've made the error myself of, you know, jumping into people on social media, you know, and where people have got narcissism and they're just looking for the adulation, or they're not, you know, they're saying they're spiritual and they're not spiritual. And you think you're going into a spiritual group on Facebook, for instance, and you think it's Buddhism or whatever it is, and you find them people, you get close to them and then they become abusive towards you. So I would add that while studying spirituality is a great thing, when you're healing CPTSD, you do need to get this book and understand what's going on, because you might think, as I did, I thought all I had to do was surrender and hand it over to a higher power and God, and that is not the way when you've got CPTSD. It's a more severe form of PTSD. So, for instance, you wouldn't tell somebody who's been in the army, you know, and being traumatized in war just to let it go. And unfortunately, in spiritual groups, that's what a lot of people do. When you tell them that you've been through a lot of pain and that you're struggling and that you've been through abuse, they throw off spiritual terminology, which does not work with CPTSD. Number 10 is we need to cultivate safe, oh, I said this already, cultivate safe relationships and seek support. That's what I just said. So be very aware that, you know, embrace the spiritual. It's a beautiful thing, but, you know, be aware that not everybody is safe. And, you know, there's a lot of ego in these spiritual groups as well, unfortunately. Number 11 is learn to identify the types of triggers that lead to flashbacks. So as you get more into understanding yourself and knowing yourself, which was also the work of Carl Gustav Jung, you know, becoming whole means that we have to know ourselves. And as we learn and we get to objectifying means that we look at our lives when we're not in flashback, maybe get a pen and we could write down all of the things that trigger us. So then we could maybe attach, is a person attached to that trigger? So we could either be having to release a person or look at something in a different way, recontextualize it, or we might actually have to cut somebody out of our lives, or you know, we might need to move, or all sorts of things, or we might need to find new work. You know, there's so many ways that we can learn to identify the types of triggers that put us in flashbacks, and then we begin to deal with them. Number 12 is figure out what you are flashing back to. I think, I don't know if I just said that, I think maybe, but anyway, figure out what you are flashing back to. So for me, sometimes my flashbacks are obvious. It's the tone of somebody's voice. It's something that I've got to do that maybe I don't want to do and I don't like. Or it could be something else, you know, it could be a smell, for instance. We've got to really look at what's bothering us and begin to eliminate and get rid of them. Number 13, be patient with a slow recovery process. The unfortunate thing is a lot of people that are trying to heal as well on social media, they think that they're going to be healed and everything's going to be hunky-dory, like fine. And it doesn't work that way. We don't know what's going to happen in the world, what's going to be on the news, what we're going to read in a newspaper that's going to trigger us. What we do need to know is that we can manage our flashbacks so that when we do get triggered, we know what we're doing with them. Also on this video, you'll find below 14 steps for managing your inner critic. Inner critic work is so important to healing our wounds, because if we've been told terrible things about ourselves, that we're not worthy and we're not good enough, and people who've not been through trauma have this, you know, going on as well. Something Carl Gustav Jung said, who was psychoanalysis, and he worked with Freud. He was born in 1875, Carl Gustav Jung, and he said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. A lot of people, what we do as well when we're in trauma, we might years later as adults go to visit our doctor and say, you know, I'm having anxiety and panic attacks. And this is the way it starts to unfold. I found for myself that I was going along quite nicely, you know, running a great business, making lots of money, drinking a bottle of wine a night, smoking cigarettes. And then eventually I wanted to stop drinking. And when I stopped drinking, I started to get anxiety and panic attacks. And eventually I stopped smoking as well. I stopped drinking in 2012 and smoking in 2014, I stopped. But the more I began to get real and stop disassociating and self-medicating, the more I got anxiety and panic attacks, and I got really, really scared and really fearful. I thought I was dying. And what was really going on was that I was suffering, and the reason I was suffering was because I had all of these unhealed wounds in myself. And the more I began to look at what was going on for me and understood what CPTSD was, the more I got really angry. I was angry for about 6 months. I did things that were helpful, like I got a foam bat and I'd beat my pillows with my anger and rage, and I'd scream into a pillow, or whatever we do. There are absolute phases for grieving. There's not one way, there are many ways. But if we can't verbally ventilate, or if we're trying to talk to the wrong people, like I tried to have a conversation with a family member about my early abuse to try and repair the wound, and they didn't want to hear it. And it's phenomenal out there how many people have families who just completely deny there was any abuse at all. It's like in Germany, with the Auschwitz and the that's gone on in history, where people just deny something so serious and so horrible has happened for human beings. So you know, there are people who are going to understand. So just make sure that you're talking to the people that actually want to help you rather than make you feel like crap. Excuse my language, but we need people that are going to nurture and love. And clearly we have to do it for ourselves as well. We don't want to get codependent. We want to realize that we've got the inner power and we can empower ourselves. So going on here, wisdom comes via experience, and that healing happens in layers. It's really important to know that. So healing is not one hit wonder. I've studied modalities. There's no one modality that's going to fix it all. There's no one book that's going to fix it all. There's no one friend who's going to fix it all. It's bit by bit and day by day. And the more we understand, the more we get to soothe ourselves. And then the beautiful thing that I realized of late, that I can be sad now and I can sit with my sadness. I don't try and run away from it. I don't try and avoid it. And when I do, I can see when I'm disassociating, and I can acknowledge that I'm going into a bit of disassociation. And that's okay too. It's the allowance, but being awareness. And also, we can take many approaches between the spiritual and the pragmatic, but no, it will never be all or nothing. Knowledge is the key. So to healing, knowledge is the key. We can go to the doctor and go and get some anxiety pills, or, think that we're going to do a modality and it's going to fix us, but it's going to be knowledge, like non-stop knowledge, and talking to people and looking at why we're stuck. And sometimes we're just going to need to grieve. For a year, I literally hid under my duvet, not completely, but I really had to return to my inner home in myself to, soothe that part of me. So letting my business go, against my will, was probably a really good thing that happened to me. And I was able to then, literally soothe myself and, just eat the foods that were healthy and, allow myself to the tears. I mean, last week I was crying about something, and I remember I was walking down a road and I was full on tears, and not to be ashamed about crying. We're so, as human beings, have been so put in a box, like, of that we can't feel, or it's wrong to feel, or we just got to get over it or think positive. And that's not the way to heal. In fact, there are so many people probably just born with CPTSD, and early trauma, and most of us never get to look at it because humanity doesn't talk about it. We need to see what's going to make us feel better. And what else can I say? There was something else I printed off, but I can't find it, that was useful. The other thing I do, what really helped me was looking at my own astrology charts. So I'm going to bring up this book again. And this is called Understanding Karmic Complexes. And this really helped me to begin to, I'm sort of at the beginning of this, but astrology, evolutionary astrology, has really helped me to look at my own wounding, because on the symbolism of a chart, you can see what's going on, and you can begin to, learn about yourself. And that's a beautiful thing to do, to be able to sort of figure out, who am I? What am I? What am I here? What am I doing here? I had therapy today, actually. I have therapy every Thursday, once a week. Let's just see what Timmy says. Timmy Thames, I am learning to identify and protect my inner child and encourage self-soothing, which also seems to lead me to be more assertive when needed. Thanks for the videos. Thank you, Timmy, for watching as well. Yeah, so self-soothing. I mean, it really took me a long time, Timmy, to bond with my inner child, but now it's automatic. It's like I'm there, I'm there for her. And she was very small when I started this. She was, I think in my mind, she was about 5, but now she's, a little bit more grown up, and she's, stands tall as well. And that affects us, how we deal with our inner child. If we shame our inner child and we make our inner child feel like crap, and we say horrible things to it and say, you're so stupid, what's wrong with you, you're so ugly, it's like, why haven't you got your life together? You're talking to your inner child, and that is not soothing. And we're all going to leave here one day. So I sort of came to a conclusion yesterday for myself that if 50-50, we don't know, but I somewhat believe that I am a soul. I do know that I'm more than this human body, that's for sure. And in that I want to go out on the wings of love. Like, I want to heal my traumas. So healing those traumas does not mean that we have to, start hanging out with the people who abused us, who will hurt us, or neither does it mean that we have to hang out with the people that give us flashbacks and or put us into flashback or trigger us. The world is immense. There are 7.5 billion of us. So we can, begin to do work that we love. We can look after our body. We can, look at where we need to heal. And also when we begin to heal the wounds, the mind, and we grieve properly, that we then get to a point where the body begins to heal as well, because the cortisol levels begin to balance out. So we're not in fight flight all the time. And then we begin to remedy the body along with, healing this stuff that's inside us. And the amount of things like that have happened to me, that I'm just freshly speaking to about in therapy, things that I've never told anybody that happened to me when I was small, that are absolutely shocking, that you could not put on a television screen. There is, and I'm aware, anybody, we all look at each other on social media, and how great life looks and everybody's got it together. I mean, this is complete bull as well. We're vulnerable, we're sensitive, we need love, we need communication, more than anything. And we can have all the money in the world and have nothing, if we can't communicate. And also, so many of us are so afraid to get into conflict, and or just not that we want to have conflict, but just to stand up for ourselves and say what we need to say to somebody. And we can, we don't have to argue when we need to say what we need to say. We need to have our needs met and meeting each other's needs. And also the other thing I want to pick up on, that as you're healing this stuff, I think in some codependency with PTSD, that if you're in relationships and there's one thing that I caught myself out, and don't do name calling. Like, it's really important that if we're in a partnership with somebody, not to call each other names, to be respectful, to, if you're having a flashback, then you can begin to say to your partner, I'm in a flashback right now, I need 5 minutes on my own, or I need you to do this. We need to communicate, and we need to not be afraid of avoiding, the day-to-day conflicts with people. And many of us, like for myself, I wasn't allowed to speak about my trauma to my parent, and they shut me down for their own reasons. And it meant that I had this inner war of these things I wanted to say that I wasn't allowed to say. And it's bloody tragic, excuse my language, but it is tragic that people haven't got the ability to hear and be kind, and just hear what you've got to say. So I think that's it for today. I've been on for a little while, and I'm going to probably be back with more in a couple of days. But if you want, if you want an hour session with me, I do sessions. I talk about this stuff. I also look at people's charts. So you can go over to Facebook and find me there, or the links below. But other than that, these videos are basically to put information out there that's going to help heal and soothe and empower us. But don't suffer in silence, okay? Because life is short, you know, and we don't know how long we've got, and that's not a negative thing, but, you know, and we need to do the creativity we love. We need to have, you know, relationships that fulfill us as well. So don't be alone, and know that you are loved as well. Okay, I know I am. So it's a good thing. Okay, I'll catch you later. Thank you for watching. I've got 3 viewers. I can't see who it is. I know Timmy was there, and so was Skip, who runs the Carl Jung Depth Psychology reading group. So you can go over to his YouTube. It's brilliant there if you want to learn about Carl Gustav Jung and his work, which is, you know, in my heart deeply. Okay, I'll catch you later. Thanks for watching.